Thank you everyone for joining us again for another episode of 123 Chess. My name is Luke.
I'm Tom.
And we're here today to, you guessed it, go over our game 6, this time with an analysis of our critical moments. So, since I played as white, I'll go ahead and kick this off. And this was, like Tom and I were just mentioning, this was a very interesting game, and we definitely can tell how our ability to recognize what we missed has already started to improve. I started with the ready opening. Again, not traditional for me. I would usually go queen pawn. And then after Tom goes here, then I decided to keep it a queen pawn game. Okay. Queen's Gambit. Queen's Gambit declined. Get to this Chigorin defense look. Okay, kind of symmetrical in that sense. And now, okay, so right here, if you guys remember last week, Tom had mentioned how this move was, and go ahead and chime in here, Tom, if I'm missing something, but I think you had mentioned that this move of his knight to there was kind of multi-purpose. Well, first of all, he wanted to open up this C file so he could get another pawn in the action for contesting the center. He also, so it was kind of trying to get rid of the cramped of the queen side, and also obviously this knight can plop over to the king side knowing I'll be kingside castling. Did I get it right, Tom?
You got it right, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so with that in mind, what I saw during the game on this that I mentioned was I saw that I liked it because obviously that was moving the same piece twice, as we know. So that it kind of helped me out with tempo. So what I did in the game is I decided to go ahead and castle. However, I realize it's going to only be move 7 here, but there's something very key that I missed. And if you remember us talking in previous videos about how when your opponent makes either a passive or kind of a move that may be a mistake or an inaccuracy that you're noticing, a lot of times you don't have much time to capitalize on that and exploit the weakness. In this case, there's a crucial element I missed, and that is this diagonal. And so
I wrote this move down in my analysis too.
No kidding. So we might have some overlap. That's awesome. So I'll try to not steal your thunder.
This is your move. When I wrote it down, I was like, move, but like it was a good
one. But yeah, so the idea here is, and I'm kind of reading through my notes, but so this is also, interestingly enough, if I go back, so this position is in a lot of Grandmaster games. But Tom's move here is the first one that deviated from that. And again, kind of one of the reasons why it wasn't found in Grandmaster games is because of the inaccuracy. And so it's all based on this. So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what's coming here. So I can have my queen here. And once she's there, well, it's a double attack on both his bishop as well as a check on his king. Now, when you're looking at the board, again, it's not too much consideration to realize there's only one move that parries both threats. And that is, once I move here, then Tom would have to move his knight back exactly where he brought it from.
Just a waste of tempo.
Yeah. So so now, I mentioned before about the tempo advantage I had when he moved at night, but now it's like a more of a tempo advantage for me. So, and it forces him back to exactly blocking that pawn, giving me like kind of a more permanent queenside majority as far as what's in the center. So with this idea, now, if you look closely here, there's really not much, that can be done. So more than likely, I mean, I looked at kind of what the computer, said was what the best options were. In all honesty, probably one of the best bets here, after I would do something like castling again, like I did, then Tom would probably castle. So that removes the pin. And then from here, the interesting thing is that once I pop my queen back here, if you notice the subtle difference of this knight still being here, this pawn still back, it's definitely a stronger position than I had in the game. And so honestly, it really was that simple. when Tom moved that, I should have looked at all of my threats to see like what exactly is the option for me to capitalize on it right away. Because as you saw, as soon as Tom castled, it's gone. And so now you might be thinking, okay, well, the idea here is maybe Tom would try to try to kind of contest for some of these squares. The problem is this bishop is actually Tom, I went through a lot of I just went all over the place with computer moves, and I found out that in many scenarios that bishop gets trapped. And so a lot of times the computer will recommend for the bishop to go back. Even grandmaster games, if of similar types of situations, the bishop would usually want to go back, which again kind of loses its tempo.
I believe it. Anytime that I see pawn forward, when you've got this sort of pin on, right?
Mm-hmm.
A forward pawn on the C file, right, or in reverse if it was on the other side of the board, it'd be on the F file.
Yeah.
Because that pawn can just advance forward one square. That often is indicative that a trap can happen if you try to retreat, something like that, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so that's why if ever my bishop is in this sort of position and this pawn comes forward, I'm never going to try to, do something like this. Instead, I'm always going to sack it.
Yeah. So really, there's only two options in this kind of setup, as Tom mentioned. Number one is to, just exchange it off. Number two would be to retreat it toward a path directly toward the king. But again, that's kind of losing a tempo. So a lot of times you will see this getting taken. And so, but yeah, I mean, there's not much else to go over in this one right now. All that I need to remember from this example is, again, when there's a passive or very backward kind of, inaccurate looking move of my opponent, I need to look at how I can capitalize on it right away, because chances are you only have one move to do it on sometimes. And so this position is definitely stronger than in our game. If I'm looking at the evaluation, I'm seeing that, okay, yeah, it's a solid, it's a solid, like more than a pawn in the evaluation. So cool. Any other comments you want to add to that, Tom?
No, I mean, I think it's saying the same thing, but I think the takeaway that I have from that is anytime you have the ability to get a check,
Mm-hmm.
or that as a potential.
Yes, checks are the most forcey moves for sure, even more than a sacrifice, because you have to parry the threat of the check no matter what. Cool. So that was my first critical moment, and now let's jump over further in the game. This one was super interesting. I really enjoyed going over this one. So I mentioned, if you guys remember from last week, and you can look on my blog, I mentioned how at this point, so to go back a couple moves here. So at this point, I decide to take this pawn with a discovery on his rook, knowing that his rook was going to take mine. But then after that, I miscalculated, because Tom and I mentioned last week how I was thinking that somehow I could magically, like after I've taken this pawn, I could somehow advance it again to create a passed pawn. But unfortunately, that just did not play out right. I did, and then Tom also mentioned that after we get to this point, I could have gone here with the tempo on his queen, and then whatever the queen does, I could, get another pawn. So then I'm a pawn up, right? Because if, Tom takes it, then I'm a solid pawn up. But again, remember, if you guys remember last week, I mentioned, I was like, yeah, you're right, but that still opens up and unlocks your bishop, which the whole idea for me wanting that passed pawn, I didn't want just a pawn, I wanted a passed pawn, because I wanted to lock up that position so fully that it would be almost impossible to get that bishop out. But there's a third option that neither of us saw at that time, and this is really cool. So this is the in-between move concept in chess. And the idea here is, well, first of all, let's look at the material. Obviously, Tom just took my rook, so he's, 4 points up right now. And the threat is to take my other rook, okay? But what if I did this? Now, again, this for lower level players, this is hard to see, but, and even in the game, again, I didn't see it, but the point is this satisfies exactly what I wanted to do, which was get a pass pawn. So it's interesting, Tom, how this has come up at least in our last 2 games, if not 3. I keep having situations like this where I actually have the right idea, but I don't have the right order of operations because I'm missing the concept of the in-between move. So in this case, this is really cool. Like, check this out. So after I take that, now I'm not going to move the pieces. I'm going to use the arrows and stuff so that we can visualize again. So the first obvious thing that any entry level player would ask is, well, can't I just take here? Okay, so let's look at that. So Tom takes my rook. Okay, so then now he's up 2 rooks. I take his queen. Okay, and now let's say greed just takes over. So now you take my queen. Now I take your rook and get a queen. So now what are we left with in the end? Well, we're left with Tom having 1 rook that's next to my king hanging, and a bishop that's pinned from my promoted queen, versus my promoted queen and a bishop that can be used. So that's a complete winning position in material. So now let's look, okay, well, what if Tom just takes 1? Okay, well, I'm still going to take the queen. And then if after I do that, let's say Tom moves the rook away. Okay, now I snatch here. Well, then look at material. Then I still have a queen, a bishop, and a 7th rank passed pawn versus his 1 rook and bishop. Again, completely winning position, no matter how you look at it in both of these scenarios. So now let's look at, well, what Tom would essentially have as the only option, and that is to move the queen somewhere. Where would you like to move it, Tom?
It was funny. I looked at this position too, and I hadn't actually explored what my option would be because I don't like any of the options. So just looking at it, the 2 real options that stand out to me are moving the queen to D7 to prevent the advance at all, right? But now I've completely blocked in my bishop if I do that.
Yep.
Makes me not like that. That being said, the bishop is kind of in rough shape as it is. But it also takes it off as a defender or attacker of that B6 square. So I think that I probably would end up going D8.
Yeah. Yep, that's what I thought too. So okay, so that's probably the best bet. I mean, I haven't looked up the engine on like those 2 between each other, but obviously having the bishop able to be unlocked at some point is preferable. So then, well, I'm just going to go right here, and again, completely winning position. I mean, it's just the exact thing I was trying to do is accomplished because of the in-between move. So now it is just completely cramped. So that's that was the cool thing I missed, is that it's all about the in-between move. Zugschenswang or something like that. I don't know how to pronounce it. I need to look it up again. I know Zugzwang is the when you have to move but you don't want to. Yeah, so that was my position number 2. And now let's look at my 3rd one. Okay, so now let's go back here. So at this point, I got my queen to the action. There's a few inaccuracies we each made at this point, but those are not as big of a deal for me to go over. So now here my idea before I move it is my idea was to check the king, and then he'd have to do something, probably move his queen in front of it. And then from here, then I would probably go here to kick his rook away. And my idea with that is that once his rook is on A8, well, then there's only 1 piece defending that pawn, the B7 pawn. So then if ever his rook or his bishop moves away, then the pawn is now hanging. So that was my philosophy behind this line. But here's what's interesting. Okay, so now Tom's rook has moved to A8, exactly as I wanted. But in the game, and I can't remember what I wrote in my evaluation or my review notes, but what I knew at this point is that, oh great, I accomplished what I wanted. Now what? that was kind of my thoughts, because you know I have a really good presence on his side of the board, but all of those pawns just kind of make it difficult to know where to go from here. And what I ended up doing in the game is this move, because the idea, you know, it wasn't bad, because now at least my bishop's doing something. It's not just staring at a brick wall. And so now it, you know, I dominate this square. But just like we mentioned on my, well, really both of the other two critical moments, is the concept of when you have an option to exploit a weakness, sometimes you only get a move to do it in, and then it's too late. Well, it just so happens that there's a completely winning position that can be obtained from this. And it's all because even though I thought, okay, I'm going to kick this rook over to A8 so that he can't guard this B7 pawn, what I didn't realize is by moving my queen to C7, it did something much, much better for me. It connected my queen to my rook. So now if I take, instead of moving my bishop here, what if I moved my rook right here? Now again, visualizing that our rook is on that square, what do you see as the threat instantly?
D8.
Exactly, with a pin of his queen to his king. So that's, and so Tom would have seen that right away. So you know, and I looked at the chess engine, but I mean, you don't even have to look at a chess engine to see kind of what the best option is. It's probably something like this. And indeed, that's what it said. So again, so now I'll actually move it first. So once I move the rook, now the threat is here with pin. So something like this. And now, but here's the thing. It's so simple. It actually wasn't just a threat of a pin. It was actually a threat of taking a piece, because after check, now you got to go back and I get a free bishop. End of story. So again, these are, you know, I'd like to say, oh, this was like such a profound, you know, like line and all of that stuff. It's funny how literally all three of these moves that I went over were actually far simpler than the ways that I actually ended up going, because all I did is I would have recognized the weakness and exploited it in the time that I'm given to exploit it, and not waiting more moves without keeping that in mind. And I think another thing to you know, to help too is, for me, I know kind of I didn't write this down as a takeaway, but I will say it now. Especially when you have so few pieces on the board, I think it's wise for me, especially if I have enough time, look at each piece. How can I improve its position? And I had three pieces. You know, if I just spent a little more time, I would have seen I had my rook here, and that here was an option. I would say, even if I didn't see this that I mentioned, I would certainly believe if I saw that, it would seem at least as good as my bishop here, getting them into the action more. So that is my three critical moments.
Cool. Thank you very much. I love those. I think those were great ones.
Thanks. Yeah, it was really interesting.
So with mine, I only ended up writing down one move that I really wanted to look at, but I ended up exploring some other ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I hit on already. I had said that here, you know, if I were to redo this thing again, I would choose to go into the Alban. Interestingly enough, this is the first move that the engine identified as really being a weakness, which it's the Chigorin defense. And
yeah.
So I think just in general, the computer identifies the Chigorin defense as being a little weaker than some of your other options.
Yeah.
So here we got that pin, right? 11 pieces. And then here, yes. Yeah. So I put down here, note Queen A4, right? Same thing that we've already explored. So we won't go over that. But okay, so here is where I took. And I said this was the thing that I really wanted to explore. was what if I hadn't taken, and the consideration that I had given was moving this pawn out, right? And so I looked into these lines, and actually it was right spot on with the analysis that that I had come up with, in our previous session, in terms of what those moves were going to look like. But here's where it arrived from that exchange. And looking at this, I do think that this is a much more favorable position to me than I ultimately land on. But actually, I thought one of the things that was interesting here is that the suggested move by the computer was actually to castle.
Oh.
Yeah, so instead of take right here in response to the castle would have been castle. And I think it's interesting. I mean, I know what the engine recommended here, Luke. I didn't want to guess at your move from this position, but out of curiosity, what would it be? I think it would
from this position.
Yep.
It's a good question. I might have wanted to go with knight e5.
Knight e5.
That would be a candidate. Knight e5 would be a candidate move.
Yep.
And then also another one would probably be just a simple a3.
Yeah. So I think that both are great moves. A3 is what the engine recommended, which is interesting because we talked about sometimes you only get one opportunity for that move that you're looking to do, because once that A3 comes, I've got to take it, right. Could retreat, right? I could retreat down to this square. I haven't really explored that as which one of those would be the preferential option. But like we discussed, there are so many lines for me to get trapped in there, and I don't want to lose that bishop. So really, I have two options. It's either going to be that, or it's going to be that.
And actually, I just this second realized d6 is trap.
D6. Oh.
If you moved your bishop to
d6,
it's a trap. Yeah.
So just to show what Luke is saying, so I can't take anymore, and these are the only squares that I can go to now, and each one of those is threatened by a pawn. So yeah, I definitely would want to capture that. At which point, I've lost that bishop. Takes away a little bit of my plan on that side. I might still be able to get that pawn into the action there, which was kind of the point. I definitely can get the knight over here. But again, that is what the engine was recommending, that castle.
That's so interesting.
Yep.
Because I personally like this position from white still.
I feel like I like that position a heck of a lot more than I like that position as white. I mean, in terms of black, I would prefer to play this than this.
Yeah, me too.
Though, I mean, at the same time, too, I think this is a little bit more of an open game, right?
Yeah.
Which is my personal preference, I think, as well. So that was the first one. That was the one that I really dissected more than anything else, was seeing where that brought us.
Yeah.
So this one I wanted to comment on too, because you and I both looked at this, and this was a moment of learning, right? We had taken this from a previous example of sticking your knight on that back row for that defensive purpose.
Yep.
But I thought it was interesting to comment on because the computer actually didn't like this move.
What did it like instead?
It preferred B6.
Whoa. Okay. Well, I guess, it's taking away that B7 weakness that was there like the whole game in our game.
Yes, it helps me with that whole problem. Yeah, so I do actually really like D6. This is just the line that the computer had recommended from here.
Wow, and your D5 pawn is really strong.
Yeah, yeah. You know that, and that line there opens up this rook. That being said, I don't know that Luke would have necessarily taken that exchange, right? If he would have taken that moment to capture.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I mean, he could still move that forward, but the funny thing is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now if he's moving that forward, he never captured with that bishop, and that just completely shuts down that line for that bishop.
Yeah, it does.
So I get that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think that is cool. And you know, I think this is where my head's at, Luke, and you can tell me whether or not you agree with this one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is a bad move just in general, right? I think the idea of defending this square by moving this knight back was a good thought. But again, going back to order of operations, I think before doing that, I would have been better to do something like this and get a move like this out of you before going to it, just to take that capture out of the mix.
Agreed. Then it would have solidified that decision. So it's not like that decision was in vain.
Right.
Yeah.
I do really like this position as black. Like if we end position, that's not what was recommended. Like I said, so the recommended move to this was the capture, but again, moving there, like opening up that line with the rook seems really good. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I wouldn't have captured it, to be honest. I would have maintained that tension.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting one, worth looking at.
Yeah.
Capture this, and then this one right here. This was the move that I think was kind of one of my biggest like errors in the game, because this is the move that really led to just a host of problems that I ended up having. Because Luke's next move of moving c5. And the engine actually recommended here, instead of moving that one, it actually recommended moving this pawn forward.
Oh yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, which we would have had a nice series of exchanges happening here. Just looking at it now, that's a free pawn, but
triple pawns.
doesn't seem that great. So you know, that's definitely going to be something that I can exploit, and it just takes away all of my problems that I really had at the end of the game with all of the cramped positions that I ended up in after this. Because this move right here, when I moved that pawn forward, was really only for the purpose of bringing this pawn out.
Yep.
I would have done it the move before, but he had 3 pieces guarding it. So I needed to get one more piece into the mix to, you know, make that into a viable option. But the moment he moved that pawn forward, this pawn was useless for the rest of the game.
Can you imagine how crazy chess would be without en passant?
Yeah. That would be crazy. Just, oh, no problem. I'll just move it right out there.
Uh-huh.
Problem solved. So yeah, we get into this whole dance, and the last move that I did like, you know, we had questioned this move a little bit.
Yeah.
And the computer did like that move, so I felt a little vindicated on that one.
Nice.
And there were a couple of small errors in here. Nothing was really that big. There was this one here, but Luke already discussed this one. This one was one of the bigger errors that I made. from the engine perspective. We had talked about weakening that pawn structure and being unsure if that was the correct thing to do. Computer said, no, don't do that, which makes sense, which we, again, caught in our own analysis.
Yeah, we did.
Which is one of the things that I think was reoccurring, and why I didn't really like identify like these solid moves, was because a lot of the things that we had discussed in our previous analysis is exactly what the computer was identifying. So I think that goes to show, you know, that we are continuing to improve, that what we're doing is working. So, you know, error that Luke discussed, still present. This one here was the last one that I just wanted to take a look at in terms of whether or not it was a good move, right, viable. And the engine did not like me moving the queen out there, which we had discussed. And I think it's partly because at this point in time, this move gets my queen out of the game now. I mean, it's right. I'm gonna have to dodge it over there. But now the big threat that I had going for me, and it actually identified that my king move here was actually where the problem was.
No, yeah.
Your problem,
Yep.
because it was saying I should have moved my king down here.
Yep.
As soon as I move my king up, then this move suddenly makes it so my queen has to be kicked off of this diagonal. And as we saw in our previous analysis, this D8 square that the queen was guarding ended up being a pretty pivotal spot.
That's interesting.
I know. And
I didn't notice that pawn move would have been so powerful to kick her off it. That was interesting.
Yeah, and it was just after this, because, you know, I mean, my whole thought behind this move was, okay, I'm going to move there,
Yeah.
and then it's going to happen, and then I just get kicked back. No big deal. I weaken the pawn structure a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, it was this little bit of an in-between move, but in reality, once I make this mistake, then this becomes devastating. And
yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that was really the last one that I had.
Okay. What they are your key takeaways?
Geez, I would say my key takeaways. You know, I hate this game. I hate the Chigoran. This is the last time I'm ever going to. So, this is the last time I'm ever going to find myself trapped into a Chigoran game.
Yep.
At least from Black side. But then you know, I don't want to say the same key takeaways that I had said from my previous analysis, because those
That's okay.
I do think that the move that I found most interesting was really this one here, and it was really just a consideration of this. And I would say perhaps when making a move for being a defender, right? Consider possible ways of removal. That way you can prepare for that. Because being able to lock down that bishop, or, you know, take something else. Because to be fair, when I made this move, I was making it for the purpose of defending that pawn. But at this very moment, there's only the 2 attacks on that pawn. So I have the defense already. I didn't actually, you know, if I did actually need that defender, then as soon as this happened, it would have been game over. I didn't need that defender. And so if I had taken a little bit more time to prepare that move, I would have been a lot better off. And then I think this pawn move was my other real key takeaway. Right here, this one, and I would say the biggest thing, because this has happened to me already once before, I think in a previous game, being aware how en passant can mess with your pawns that are in your back row.
Yeah, that's a crucial one.
Yep, that really hit me this game, and I know I've gotten hit by it before. And so just being aware that you can't just expect to move that pawn forward 2 on your next move when your opponent has advanced a pawn into the 5th row.
Nice. I think for me, my key takeaways would be number 1, when you have a notable positional advantage, your goal should be to convert it into a winning position. And usually that has to be done swiftly because sometimes you don't have a lot of time to work with. And then also, yeah, again, I didn't mention this in my blog, but man, I think it's pronounced Zwischenzug. Yeah, something like that. I'm getting closer. But so the in-between move, that is something that I need to always keep in mind, because if I look more for those in-between move options, I do some of them, the simpler type, but some of them can mean the difference between a drawish game and a completely winning one where you can take material, because just you decide to, once you look for that first move and you see the good one, look for something better first. Maybe that will help you out in the long run. And it kind of goes back to, again, Tom, I remember last time on the English opening, that really cool exchange that you showed on your analysis where we went pretty deep. It was like 5 moves out. And that's the same idea with that move in this game I mentioned with the, with the Zwischenzug, is the pawn, when I, get that pawn advanced first, hitting the queen, that just changes the reality of the entire, position. So I need to look for more of those. I think
all those forced moves. It's attacking major pieces. It's getting the in. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. All right, so now we're going to go through our Grandmaster game that we analyzed, which had one moment of an identical position to our game. All right, so first, it was a little bit different move order. That's called the Horowitz defense. And right here, this was 100% identical to the moment at this time in our game. But white went a very different path from here. A lot of interesting knight maneuvers in this game. And an aggressive pawn move.
Yeah, very aggressive. You see these pawns just building up on the king side here, which is really interesting. I'm terrified to do an attack like that.
Yeah. And then this interesting king move. It's like, take my exchange for my knight. Nope, I'm going to move back. I just realized this knight of mine is really powerful. Okay. So now the continuation is this.
There.
Get the rooks into some action more. Trying to. And then this.
Yeah, that one was going mine. One pawn, that one pawn wasn't enough. Gonna bring the H pawn in.
Man. Okay, and what's he doing? He's hitting my knight. So I'm just gonna advance the pawn to parry that threat. And we'll put a link, or we'll put the PGN of this game in our description on the video too, for those of you who are interested in who played and where it was at. I find it so interesting that now after I take that bishop, this knight doesn't really do much, which is so counterintuitive, you'd think, because he's in such a good, theoretically, a generally good position. But okay, now another advance of those crazy kingside pawns.
Let's see here.
All right, and now last attempt of hitting both rooks, but then the exchange comes. And after this point, the error is this. Boom. And from here, obviously, white is threatening some mate opportunities with taking here, and then, you know, the knight's already covering there, so pretty cool stuff.
And that would be the only way to save that knight immediately, but as soon as the queen comes up, then
yeah, it's lost.
it's bad.
But yeah, interesting. I mean, a short game, but which makes it nice to memorize. But it was yeah, very interesting, different continuation where you're clarifying the center right away instead of what I did, which is maintaining the tension for quite some time, which I like to do. So, well, thank you guys so much for joining us again. I hope you've benefited from our content, and we wish you the best and continue to improve your game. And last but not least, we do have a tournament coming up in our club on chess.com. So if you aren't a member of our club on chess.com, I'll provide a link in the description of this video. And do not hesitate. If you're a beginner, if you're intermediate, whatever you're at, it's going to be a really cool experience, and we'll analyze our games together at the end. So see you guys next time. Have a fantastic week.